Mitchell Karasik here at the Paley Center in Midtown Manhattan. I'm with Dan Klores, who is the filmmaker of the 30 and 30 series here with Reggie Miller and the New York Knicks, and of course Rick Allen as well, who's moderating the event tonight. I welcome both for joining us here on LockerBlogger.com. And let's start out with the filmmaker, Dan, and tell us a little bit about how this came to pass as far as when the idea came forth to you. How was it brought to you, and then what were your first thoughts of this?
Well, I was approached by ESPN to be part of 30 for 30, and I only had two ideas, but the idea that was pulling me and that they loved was on Reggie Miller and the New York Knicks. And I saw, actually Donnie Walsh will be here tonight, sent me a photograph of Reggie making a shot against the Knicks in Madison Square Garden, and the faces of the people in the background, which was such horror. So originally I wanted to do a film on that, just that photo, but it wasn't from the years that I was most interested in. It was later on. So I then said, well, this is not merely a basketball player, this is a performance artist, and that's what really interested me, Reggie Miller as a performance artist.
And of course, for any Knicks fan, he was clearly the enemy of the Knicks, certainly through the 90s, and certainly in a fun-loving way, I think, but also in a way where he certainly dominated the Knicks at times, and of course, during this 8.9-second span, which made for great drama and ultimately for your piece.
Yeah, Reggie had some success against the Knicks. He scored 25 points in the fourth quarter of Game 5 in '94. He scored 9 in 8 and 9 seconds. He basically destroyed the Knicks.
Is that the greatest, not one play, but multiple plays within 9 seconds, maybe ever in the history of sports?
Look, there are many instances in sports where incredible surprises happen in a very brief period of time. This was really memorable for all the reasons that Dan captures in his great film. You had more than just the moment of sports. You had the moment in history and in culture. You had a team that was really from the Midwest against its arch rivals in the Big Apple, so that you had kind of mid-America, small town versus the biggest of big cities. You had Reggie Miller, who was controversial in terms of Donnie's choice of him to draft him in '87 up against a local hero who turned out to not be a great pro player, and Reggie was a franchise player for 17 years.
Now, when you went into this, obviously you had a premise and some ideas of what you were going to do, but what was the one thing you came out with that was totally different than going in, that you really end up with a premise in your mind?
Well, I zeroed in on 4 key moments. The Starks headbutt, the Reggie versus Spike, 25 in the fourth, and 8 points in 9 seconds, and the Ewing finger roll. But as I said, I wasn't a Knicks fan in those days, and I didn't appreciate how good the Knicks were. And that's what I got out of all the research in the film, because I watched all the games for those 3 years. And they were tough. They were not only tough physically, they were mentally tough, and they played like a team. Which is when you grow up and you love Bradley and the Busher and Frazier and Reed and those guys, that's the mark in your mind. Oh, that's the way the game is played. They were not that, but they played like that. They hit the open man. They went down low. They played really, really hard defense. They knew how to win. They just probably lacked a point guard that could penetrate and score a quicker one. So I really grew to have a great deal of respect for the Knicks, and certainly Pat Riley. I think the guy's a genius, actually, as a coach. He's a genius. When you look at that team, Ewing was their one superstar. Everyone else was a role player. So Riley did a magnificent job. He did what a great coach does. He convinced his players they could win. And also, it's the Michael Jordan era.
And there is a little bit of the small mentality, small city mentality versus big city mentality. But do you think in the NBA and even in sports that around the country, it is important to have sort of a big city also winning? You know, is it good when the Lakers win, good when the Knicks win? You know, obviously just to help capture the audience of the rest of the country.
I think it has great impact in every market. From a league perspective, the big markets have to do well, because you've got to be able to penetrate the major viewership. But in smaller cities, that is the centerpiece of city life.
And certainly in this situation, there's a little bit of a David slaying Goliath here.
I think that's right. It's interesting to me, Dan, mentioned Pat Riley, who has been such an extraordinary coach. And the film talks about how he was able to create an ethos on the team where they really were them against everybody else that led to the toughness. If you can break the mental focus, if you can get into the other team's head, I think that's the ingredients to really start to have your opponent fall apart. And I think, from watching the film, I was reminded how successful Reggie was in doing that.
And then on Reggie Miller, what was something you learned about him, maybe more a little bit off the court, that no one would realize his true inner feelings and thoughts?
Well, I think the key to the film, what the film is really about, is there's a great line in the film. Well, he grows up as a little boy. He's one of 5 kids. He has a sister that's a year older than him named Cheryl. And she is probably the greatest women's basketball player in history. She is a dominating figure in their household. She's much better than her younger brother. She's much better than any boy in the neighborhood. She beats them on the court, off the court. He cannot beat her. So he cannot beat her. He loses to his sister day and night. So what do the Knicks represent to Reggie Miller? His sister. Big stage, New York, the Knicks. We're in Indiana, Middle America. He says, it's Cheryl all over again.
Guys, appreciate a couple minutes for joining us here on LockerBlogger.com, and it was really a great piece that you put together.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.